Hi again. As I said previously, the slides will be on the website, so you will be able to see the detail. I don't want to go through all the slides, but if there is a slide that I'm skipping that you see that you're interested in, please indicate that and I can stop at that specific slide. Just talking about the challenge again, I said in the first presentation that Johannesburg is a huge area, and obviously that affects the fieldwork. It covers 1,644 square kilometers, and the population is 4.4 million. Just as an interesting fact, the young people, those 30 years and younger, are 1.6 million people in the city, 36% of the population. So you're representing them here. The city is a city of disparities. We're all aware of that because you reside in Joburg. The other thing is that Johannesburg has an extremely quick rate of change. I've listed many things, townships, subdivisions, and so on, but also street addresses. That means that new townships are developed on a regular basis, and they have new stands, and new stands or properties have new addresses. So it all trickles down to what changes? It's the address. In the city, the Development Planning Department is responsible to allocate addresses. So the local authority is the custodian of the owner or generator of street address data. And I think that's an important concept to remember because it means that we need to supply the data to other people or other organizations or companies like the GPS companies who use that for routing, for instance, and it's not the other way around. We need to supply addresses to Google, for instance, because we are the source of information. Properties are demarcated by the Surveyor General, so we've got Surveyor General plans and diagrams that indicate each property with a coordinate, and then the ownership of that information is from the Deeds Office, and they also indicate an address. Just to show where we are, Development Department, there we are. These are all the other departments and political structures at the top. We have several data sets that we maintain and capture, and there you can see the street address is one of them. Street address within the municipality, they are required by different departments, so it's very important that we have one address database for the city, and then obviously for external organizations as well. We know that a FICA needs an address. For voting purposes, we need an address, and specifically a physical address to say where the people reside. We spoke about the GIS, which is the foundation, because that is where location is, and address indicates the location. In the city, we have a land information system, and that contains the single source of data, and that is then for reliable property information or a credible service delivery and social inclusion. Here you can see what it looks like in the land information system with the property as the center and the attribute data as Dirk referred to. Each of these data sets also have metadata that describes the data itself. Here you can see how important it is in terms of service delivery, that if you have an address, it will reflect on the account. It's important that the account goes to the right person, and if water or power needs to be cut off, that the correct address's power is cut off. Here we say a single data set, but street address allocation has to be done in a standardized methodology. Now, also with us today are Tobile and John from the street address section. So if there's any detail that you require from them on how addresses are allocated, you're welcome to talk to them. Basically, it says that every 16 meters, we'll have a street number, a new street number. So that makes provision for larger stands to have more than one street number permissible. So that if that property is subdivided, that you actually have already made provision for that. Also on corner stands, you would have two addresses. The one is the active address, and that's the permissible address, because the entrance to that stand is from this road here. Okay, yes? Okay. So you're welcome to ask more questions around that. Obviously, a street address has a road name and a number. So if there is no road name, obviously, how do you allocate an address? The challenges, this is also on the website. Is the address displayed? Is it displayed correctly? Because it needs to be at least 75 millimeter in height at least. Is the street name displayed? Is the signage on the intersections displayed of the street names? Is the street name spelled correctly? And is it aligned to the SG plan? So the source of the name is then from the Survey General as it reflects on the Survey General plan. So there's a cross-verification that needs to happen there. So just quickly to look at the challenges. Street addresses are a partnership between the city and its citizens. So we allocate the names, but the citizens have to display the number. So we need to get the buy-in of the citizens to display the number and to display the correct number as well. These are just examples of the display of the numbers. Other examples on the curb. Another challenge is around complexes and gated communities. The way we do it in the city is that we have one address at the entrance of the complex. Now you can imagine that an address at the entrance of a complex means that it affects routing, because you can't enter or a gated community. You can't just enter the property on the nearest street. You actually first have to go through the entrance, and is that complex name displayed so that people can actually find it? And then within the complex, what happens there? Are there street names? You know, do we need to get those names? And do we have those numbers? Just examples here. Informal areas, approximately 250,000 households in the city live in informal areas. That's more than 1 million people. And often there are no formal streets in those areas, or the stands and properties aren't even demarcated. So those people also have a right to services. They must not be excluded. So how do we find them? And how do we maintain this information? And to complicate it even further, there are backyard shacks as well, and often that's a different household that we also need to find. Here is a map indicating, indicating an area. If you look at the map with the formal properties, it'll seem as though nothing is happening in this area, but if you go to the next slide, you will actually see the houses that are on the ground. So those households do not have addresses. This is what it looks like. So definitely not something happening there. No street names. I've mentioned that several times. The names have to be displayed. Who knows the inner city well? So who can tell me where is a street name displayed? Is there a standard? Sometimes it's the curb, sometimes it's on a street pole, sometimes it's on a building. So isn't there something that we can do to standardize that? Also, if street names are changed, people have to be informed. At the moment, what we do, we deliver letters to the citizens. And you can imagine how terrible that is, because you can't find the people. There are gated communities, you have to deliver the letters. So it's a whole process. So that in itself for you is part of the challenge. And are people involved in that whole process? Just some pictures of signage. Then here's an example, Commercial Extension 34, with no street names. Now what happens in an area like this, if we identify that, we cannot just allocate a street name because there has to be community participation. The result of the community participation needs to go to the SAGN, South African Geographical Names, to be approved, because there are certain guidelines attached to that, and then it needs to go through the MACOM process. So it's a whole process which we think can be streamlined. Here's the example. You can see no street names, so there are no street numbers. Another example where different numbers are used. So this is in Naledi Extension 1, where there are street numbers, house numbers, as well as stand numbers. So sometimes the one house displays a street number, the next house displays a stand number, so you can imagine the confusion in those areas. Here's an example. You can see that's the street number, that's the stand number, and that is the house number. And often we don't even have the house numbers. Okay, that's a big challenge. Another one for you. Good. Building names. Who works in a building in the city? Who lives in a flat in the city? Is that name displayed? Is it? Good, good. Is yours displayed? No, it's not. Okay. So that needs to be addressed, and there needs to be participation. And I think the challenge there is that the information is very dynamic. So we can't have field workers maintaining that information. With the farms, at the moment we do not allocate addresses to the farms or street addresses to the farms, but we have the farm description. But now you can imagine in an area where there are farms and then where there are ordinary other full title properties. It could be that next to a farm on both sides there are street addresses, and then suddenly you have a farm number. So how, if you don't know exactly where that entrance is, will you find that farm? And how does that affect routing? The challenges, I think I've touched on all of those. And the benefits, I think I've touched on those as well.